There are books that change the way you think, and then there are books that people swear were never meant to be read at all. Not because they are boring, not because they are wrong, but because they feel unsafe. The Necronomicon is one of those names that doesn't sit quietly in the mind. It doesn't feel like a title. It feels like a warning. Say it once, and something shifts. Say it twice, and you start to notice how many people already know the name, even if they don't remember where they heard it from. A forbidden book, an ancient manuscript, a text bound in human skin, written in a language that no longer exists. A book that teaches rituals mankind was never supposed to learn. A book that opens doors that should remain sealed. For centuries, people have whispered about it. Libraries have searched for it. Authorities have supposedly banned it. And more than a few readers have claimed that simply owning a copy brought them misfortune, illness, or madness. What makes the Necronomicon disturbing is not just what it allegedly contains. It's how easily people accept that it might be real. That maybe this book slipped through history unnoticed, passed from hand to hand, burning quietly in the background of civilization. And tonight, you are not here to be reassured. You are here to listen. As if this book existed, as if it had a history, as if someone once opened it and never fully came back. The story begins in a place where history and myth blur together, where the sand remembers more than the people who walk across it. The name tied to the Necronomicon is Abdul al-Hazred, a poet, a wanderer, and, according to legend, a man who looked too long into places humans were never meant to see. He lived sometime around the 8th century, traveling through the deserts of the Middle East, alone for years at a time. Not for trade, not for pilgrimage, but for knowledge. The kind of knowledge that doesn't make you wiser, only stranger. They say he entered ruins older than recorded history, cities swallowed by sand, long before any known civilization had risen. They say he listened at night, not for animals, but for voices carried by the wind. Voices that spoke languages no scholar could identify. And whatever he heard, whatever he learned, changed him forever. The Necronomicon, originally called Al-Azif, was not written as a guide for power. It was written as a record, a warning, a desperate attempt to capture truths that were already tearing his mind apart. The word Azif itself refers to the sound insects make at night, but in ancient folklore, it also described something else: the whispering of demons after sunset. Al-Hazred claimed that reality was thinner than people believed, that beneath the surface of the world, older beings existed. Not gods in the human sense, but entities so ancient that humanity was irrelevant to them. And worse, he claimed they were not gone, they were sleeping. What made the book dangerous was not spells or rituals, but the worldview it introduced. The idea that human history was not the center of existence, but we were late arrivals, temporary tenants in a universe that did not working in a mart of God. What made the book dangerous was not the center of existence, that we were late arrivals, temporary tenants, that store of order that they were even here, that them was not wonder me, the words was not. What made the book dangerous was not the center of existence, that we were due to they were done with a dunable concern, that we were only ever tid money. We'd made the book buildings from more than too anch. He claimed the universe that did not care if we survived. The Necronomicon allegedly detailed locations where the veil between worlds was weak, stars whose alignment influenced reality itself, and rituals that could attract attention from what should remain unaware of us. This was not knowledge meant to empower. It was knowledge that reduced humanity to something small and fragile. And according to the legend, That realization alone was enough to break minds. Alhazred himself did not die peacefully. Witnesses claimed he was torn apart in broad daylight by something invisible, while people watched helplessly. Others said he simply vanished, leaving behind only fragments of his writings. And yet, the book survived, or at least parts of it did. Copied, translated, hidden. The original Arabic text was said to have been destroyed, but Greek and Latin translations surfaced centuries later, each one incomplete, each one slightly different, as if the book resisted being preserved accurately. This inconsistency only made it more disturbing, because if the Necronomicon was merely fiction, why did so many versions exist? Why did scholars across Europe reference it cautiously, as if acknowledging its existence carried risk? Why were copies reportedly locked away in restricted sections of libraries, accessible only to those with special permission? And why did so many accounts end the same way? With warnings. Not about evil, not about demons, but about curiosity. The Necronomicon never promised power. It promised perspective. And according to those who believed in it, that was the most dangerous thing of all. Because once you truly accept how small humanity is, how little control we have, how ancient the universe really is, you don't close the book the same person who opened it. After Alhazred's death, the Necronomicon did not disappear. It became quieter. That was worse. By the time Europe entered the early Middle Ages, rumors of a forbidden manuscript had already reached scholars who had never seen the desert, never heard the wind speak at night, and never questioned the age of the world beyond what Scripture allowed. The Greek translation appeared first, attributed to a monk who refused to sign his name. He wrote only one note in the margin of the final page, short and trembling, as if written in haste. This book does not teach, it reveals. From there, the text spread unevenly, not copied openly, not debated publicly, but mentioned indirectly in letters between scholars, hidden footnotes in theological disputes, and private collections that were never catalogued properly. The Necronomicon was never advertised. It was discovered by accident, by people already searching for answers they couldn't ask out loud. What disturbed the academic world was not what the book said, but how it contradicted certainty. It did not attack religion directly. It simply ignored it. The universe described in its pages did not revolve around humanity, divinity, or moral order. It was vast, ancient, and indifferent. That idea alone was enough to unsettle institutions built on meaning and hierarchy. As translations multiplied, so did inconsistencies. Some versions spoke of star-born entities. Others described geometry that could not exist in physical space. Some focused on rituals, others on cosmology. But every version shared the same tone. Not excitement, not ambition, but dread. The kind that comes from understanding something too late. Church authorities eventually took notice, not because the book caused uprisings, not because it inspired heresy, but because it made people quiet, contemplative, uncomfortable. A reader of the Necronomicon didn't come away wanting to rebel. They came away doubting the importance of rebellion itself. That was dangerous. Copies were seized, burned, publicly denounced. Yet the book never vanished completely. It slipped into private hands, monasteries, royal libraries, hidden behind false titles or misfiled deliberately. Some collectors didn't even read it. They simply owned it, as if proximity alone mattered. As if possessing the book meant standing closer to a truth others refused to face. And then there were the incidents. The scholars who abruptly abandoned their work, the translators who stopped mid-sentence and never resumed, the librarians who cataloged the book and later insisted it was never there. None of these stories were dramatic. They were subtle. That made them harder to dismiss. Because madness doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just withdraws. Unlike other forbidden texts, the Necronomicon never created a movement. There were no cult manifestos, no organized followers, no unified interpretation. That was its quiet brilliance. The book resisted community. It isolated its readers. Each person who opened it encountered something slightly different, not in the words themselves, but in what those words implied. Some readers fixated on the entities, others on the mathematics, others on the idea that time itself was not linear, but layered, folded in ways human perception couldn't navigate safely. And the more someone tried to systematize the book, to turn it into doctrine or practice, the more it seemed to unravel. Scholars argued endlessly about whether the Necronomicon was literal or symbolic. Was it a record of ancient encounters, a philosophical thought experiment, a metaphor stretched across centuries? The problem was that the book never clarified, and worse, it never cared. It offered no reassurance that understanding was possible. It suggested that some knowledge exists without a human-shaped conclusion. That alone was enough to make people uneasy. Because we are conditioned to believe that if something can be known, it can be controlled. The Necronomicon suggested the opposite, that knowing might only make you more aware of your helplessness. This is why it was never meant for mass consumption, not because it was too complex, but because it was too honest. There were no heroes in its pages, no victories, no final revelations that tied everything together neatly. There was only scale, time stretching backward beyond memory, forward beyond relevance, and humanity, small and temporary, trying desperately to matter in a universe that never noticed. When the book resurfaced in later centuries, it was often dismissed as myth. That was safer. To call it a legend, to label it fiction, to reduce it to curiosity. Because acknowledging even the possibility that such a worldview could be true was uncomfortable. And so, the Necronomicon became something else. A rumor. A reference. A forbidden name whispered in horror stories and academic jokes. But even as it faded from serious discussion, its shadow remained. Because once an idea exists, it doesn't need a book to survive. And the most dangerous ideas are not the ones that inspire action. They are the ones that quietly change how you see the world, without asking your permission. By the early 20th century, the Necronomicon had become something unstable. It existed everywhere and nowhere at once. Referenced in private correspondence, dismissed in public lectures, quietly requested through back channels by people who didn't want their interest recorded. What changed was not the book itself, but the world around it. Science was rewriting reality. Time was no longer absolute, space was no longer intuitive, and suddenly, the ideas buried in the Necronomicon didn't feel ancient. They felt early, as if someone had arrived at disturbing conclusions long before the tools existed to explain them. This is when the tone of the discussion shifted. Not fear, not reverence, but discomfort. Because the book no longer felt like superstition. It felt misaligned, out of place. A voice speaking too soon. People began to notice a pattern.
Every serious attempt to pin the Necronomicon down, to catalog it definitively, to prove it false or authentic, ended the same way, with uncertainty. Scholars disagreed on its origins, but agreed on one thing. The book resisted closure. No original manuscript ever surfaced. No complete translation existed. Every copy contradicted another in small but significant ways. And yet, the core idea never changed. The universe did not revolve around us. That message remained intact, as if preserved deliberately. And then there were the readers outside academia, the ones who found fragments, quotations, references. They didn't treat the book as a source, they treated it as a lens. They began to speak differently, not about monsters or rituals, but about insignificance, about how human meaning felt like a local illusion, about how history suddenly seemed thin, fragile, temporary. These weren't toted, man. In fact, 55 millions small quected, but a different lack. The people have important, from devived to the lens. Then, the end of the Necronomicon started. The mental of the most friends of events and significance, one's will interview. They felt worth. The ghast was one, the call of the meeting. They began to speak differently. The ones who found them from vary the lens. But then they were the core of the book no longer way. The book seems more about 51, but about feels soon more. These were the things with Linz, and then with Mini 12, felt about there. These weren't unstable people. They were ordinary readers, thinkers, writers. And what they experienced wasn't madness. It was detachment, the slow erosion of certainty. And that was harder to fight, because you can argue with delusion. You can't argue with perspective.
At some point, the question stopped being, is the Necronomicon real, and became, why does it feel real enough? Why did so many people recognize its worldview instinctively? Why did it echo thoughts people already had, but hadn't dared to articulate? This is where the danger peaked, not in belief, but in familiarity. Because when an idea feels familiar, you stop questioning where it came from. Here is the part where the ground shifts. The Necronomicon does not exist. There was no Abdul al-Hazred, no ancient manuscript, no forbidden library copy passed down through centuries. The book was invented in the early 20th century by a writer who understood something most people don't, that the most convincing lies are not about facts, they are about structure. The Necronomicon was created by H.P. Lovecraft, not as a hoax, but as a narrative device. A fictional book designed to make a fictional universe feel larger than the story itself. He never pretended it was real. And yet, people wanted it to be. Why? Because Lovecraft didn't invent monsters. He articulated a fear that already existed. The fear that humanity is not central. The fear that meaning is fragile. The fear that the universe does not owe us comprehension. The Necronomicon worked because it never asked to be believed. It behaved like real forbidden knowledge. Fragmented, inconsistent, referenced more than shown. It smote some of the deserve to be. It inventioned with more any thigs. For fissions lent, for fictional meth for fissions. For then, it is before more forbidden, and work to them. Forbidden, meth work to them. Forgetting that, troubled for 49 of what works just mimicked lost texts behave. And in doing so, it slipped past skepticism.
People didn't fall for the Necronomicon because they were gullible. They fell for it because it felt true. Not factually, but emotionally, intellectually, existentially. And that is the quiet lesson underneath the story. Books don't need to exist to be dangerous. Ideas don't need to be real to change you. The Necronomicon never opened portals. It never summoned anything. But it did something more unsettling. It taught people to imagine a universe where humanity does not matter. And once that thought settles in, you don't need a forbidden book anymore. You carry it with you. The book that should not exist never did. And yet, here you are, thinking about it. And that's why the story works. Because the most forbidden thing the Necronomicon ever contained was not knowledge. It was perspective.